Hello, my name is Jeff Waycott. I am a member of Recovery Church, and I have 34 years of sobriety. I s- I started out in the steps at about 6 months sober back in the end of 1989. My sponsor took me through the steps in about 6 hours, and that was the first time I had ever been through the steps. It was the last time I had ever been through the steps. I haven't had to revisit going through 4 and 5 again because I practice 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. That being said, I'm gonna go right down through the book, and I'm gonna lay out how the original members used to do the steps. Okay, so my sponsor and his sponsor and the people before them were descendants of Clarence Snyder, who was, I believe, the 36th member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The steps were handed down from generation to generation, the way we do them, and anywhere from like 5, 6, 7 hours, something like that. We'd sit on a Saturday or a Sunday and walk somebody through the steps and get that needed and that guaranteed spiritual experience. And that's what the steps are all about. The early members and Bill Wilson included called AA the spiritual kindergarten. And if you never leave that, you don't understand. I truly believe that, and I was looking for Recovery Church for a long, long time. I truly believe that the culmination of the steps is a belief in just a faith in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. I truly believe that. That's where the steps are designed to lead you. That's where the big book is designed to lead you. It talks about in the big book about God coming down to live and breathe within your heart. And there is no other religion on earth that talks like that. None of them talk about God being something that you can feel, hear, and touch. And so when God lives and breathes within us, he becomes something that we can feel and touch. Okay. So I'm going to start it off with the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I may weave in and out of the Bible, but let's see where it goes. Okay. So I usually start off with the preface. Um, and I'm going to read the stuff that I usually read, and it's just a declaration of why I do it the way I do it. Okay, it says because the preface says because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists a strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. It is the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is what we're supposed to be teaching from and learning from. Okay, the forward to the first edition, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered, and that's italicized, is the main purpose of the book. Okay, and it doesn't say you can change anything. It doesn't say a roundabout way. It says this is precisely how the first 100 members of Alcoholics Anonymous recovered, and we're going to go to this forward to the second edition, and this is why. Okay, of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, and this was written in 1955 after 20 years of AA's history. Of alcoholics that came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program. But great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. In other words, they had between a 75 and a 90% success rate. Okay, and that's huge compared to now, which is about, I believe it's about a 5% success rate. And the problem is now you can go to a meeting and hear about 50 different ways of going through the steps. When this book I read says this is precisely how they recovered, and you really take it as a whole or don't take it at all. If you change it, you don't get the results the book is professing. Okay. If it's changed, somebody changed it along the way. If it's not exactly the way it is in the book that you went through the steps, try it this way. Because this way is guaranteed to produce a spiritual experience in about 90% of the people that do it. Okay. And the people that don't, they have disclaimers throughout the steps, like the fifth step. It talks about in the fifth step about people who don't stay sober as people who may have skimped on their fifth step. They may have taken inventory in their fourth step, but held on to some of the worst items in stock, is what it says. Okay, and keep that in mind when we go through the fourth and fifth step. We're supposed to be taking inventory. We're not here to take. We're not here to just tell somebody all the little nuances and get down to every tiny little grain of sand. Okay. It's a fact finding, fact facing mission. Okay. That's the way the book words it. And we need to get this stuff out so the Spirit of God can come in. That's it. The spiritual experience is what the steps were all written about. It is about what will relieve the obsession to drink. Okay. And so we move on to the doctor's opinion. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. For a little bit further from there. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. On the other hand, and as strange as this may seem to those who don't understand, once a psychic change, spiritual experience, has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. Okay, and so they're talking about the spiritual experience. The spiritual experience is everything what the steps have been written about. They've been concocted, they've been grabbed from other resources. They were taken from the six principles of the Oxford group. They were taken from the Bible. They were taken from many different sources and coalesced into this thing that actually Dr. Carl Jung was trying to produce in Roland Hazard when he went over to Europe to try to get sober. Okay, and this spiritual experience seemed to be the only way that an alcoholic could recover from alcoholism. And this is the forming of AA. Okay, this is all in our histories if you read them. Okay, and Carl Jung was trying to produce this spiritual experience. He didn't know how to do it yet. Bill hadn't put it all together yet. And that's Bill had designed these steps and come up with these steps because in the Oxford group with their 6 tenets, which have a lot of the principles of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, they were having spiritual experiences with this stuff and they were dedicating their lives to telling other people about it, to creating disciples. And they were telling other people about it because that was part of the tenets of the Oxford group, and they were having success. People were staying sober. People weren't dying drunk anymore, and that's the whole key. People who wanted to get sober could get sober, and before this, they couldn't. They just died. All right, people have always had spiritual experiences here and there. Once in a while, they'd find Jesus, they'd find Christ, and the power of God would enter them, and it would blot out the entire disease. And that's kind of how it works. And I've taken a lot of people through the steps over the years. I've taken at least 1,000 people through the steps. Okay, in my home, in classroom sizes. I mean, in September 30th, we took 25 people through, and I watch them around Recovery Church, and they just, the smile never leaves their face. They're on this path, and now they're in a position with Recovery Church that they've got reinforcement after you go through the steps, which in AA, most of the time people don't have. They don't have any more direction than going through the steps. You get the spiritual experience and then they stop. It tells us in the book that we're not supposed to stop. We're supposed to seek out one's priest, minister, or rabbi. We're supposed to get more involved with whatever religion we're in. We're supposed to pursue God. You know, you hear it all the time at meetings, and people talk about turning your will and your life over to God in the third step, but they don't understand exactly what that is. Your will, all your decisions that you make, you run them by God first. You pray about them first. That very rarely do we do that entirely. We'll give God pieces of our life, but we don't give him the whole life, right? And it's not up to us to give God the life. And we're going to get into that in a second here. Okay, so there is a solution, page 25. The great fact is just this, nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things which we could never do by ourselves. We're going to move forward quickly through Bill's story. There is a solution, more about alcoholism and we agnostics. Reason being is we're trying to put this as a teaching on a tutorial on how to bring somebody through the steps. That stuff is what we tell people to read ahead of time, and we review it. I've got a list of pages that I hit when I take somebody through the steps. Because I want to review what they've read and slam home all the stuff that it talks about. Okay, so we move to page 62. Um, let's see. This is the how, and this is at the bottom of the page. This is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God is going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the father, and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we passed to freedom. And it talks about the arch, two or three different spots in the big book. And in the big book, we're building an archway with the steps. Okay, they talk about this. After the fifth step, we have to, review the first 5 steps that we did, making sure we didn't leave anything out. It talks about, did we fail to put enough sand in or mortar into the sand to make the mortar? Is it strong enough? Is the arch or the blocks properly in place? It's asking us to build this archway. It talks about the cornerstone and the keystone. Okay, and faith is the cornerstone. God is the keystone. This principle that he is the father and we are his children. And it has to be addressed. It has to be addressed, because if God is not the father and we are not his children, then we automatically, by human nature, slide into the position of God. So we're still in control of our lives. And that's a problem for an alcoholic. We are selfish, self-centered. Okay, right before this passage, it talks about that selfishness and self-centeredness, and we must be rid of the selfishness, or it kills us. That's what the book says. So, how do we get rid of the selfishness? We see people, they sober up and they go back out into the world, and they don't run anything past God. They don't get on their knees to, I give people a list of readings that they're supposed to do every morning and every night. And people struggle and they have trouble and they just stop doing it. They think they can just get this lift after the 4th and 5th, and then that's great. That's going to work. It works for a little while. But if you don't continue with taking, going out and making your amends in your 9th step, taking your daily inventory with the 10th step, seeking God further in your 11th step, and you're supposed to get out there and start taking people through the steps too. And in any one of those places, people balk. They stop. They don't have time. Their life gets busy. So it's adamant that we get into this. It's pertinent that we got to get into this this way of life right after we go through the steps. We're going to Recovery Church. We could start into a Bible study. We could get involved in our church. You could take on a service position at Recovery Church. There are so many different things here to do. Okay, so after page 62, we jump from there. We go to step 3. Okay, page 63, which says, we were now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker, as we understood him, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. We thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. It's strong language. Abandon ourselves utterly to God. That means we go to God with everything. I mean, and it's not what people think. It's not trying to turn your will over to God with self-will. You cannot will yourself to turn your will over to God, okay? It just, if we could have done that before, we would have done that before. We can't will ourselves to stop drinking. We can't will ourselves to stop doing drugs, and we can't will ourselves to turn our will over to God. And it talks about that right after the third step, the second paragraph after that. It tells us what the third step is. The third step is a prayer to prepare your heart for the fourth and fifth step. That's what it is. Okay. It's a leap of faith. Okay. So the second paragraph on page 63 and 64, it says, next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves that had been blocking us from God. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. Okay, so the problem is that we have to change the way we think about things. Okay, the steps are a process of getting us connected to God. That's what they are. They're a process. And it's really difficult to understand that before you even start the process in the third step. So what we need to do is just take a leap of faith and start living this way. Like everything depends upon God. Okay. So that's why you hear these things in the rooms like that. Step 6 is just a paragraph. Step 7 is just a paragraph. Well, that's because God's doing the work. If we're going to rely on God and we're going to turn our will and our life over to God, then in step 6 and 7, we have to keep going to God with this stuff. And he removes our character defects. We don't work on them with more self-will. We go to God and he relieves this stuff. That's the whole premise behind this, is to let God do the heavy lifting on the stuff that we can't do. We can't change who we are. We can't do that by ourselves. We can't change the very essence of who we are. Only God can do that. And it's through relying on him. And so this premise that we turn our will and our lives over to God through the third step, it's not right. What happens is it says the third step can have little or no permanent effect unless immediately followed by a strenuous effort. That means the fourth and fifth. So the third step is preparing the way for the fourth and the fifth step. Okay. And we're going to get into that in just a second, but I want to go back and preface a couple of things. The first step. Okay. The first step is a conclusion of your drinking and drugging career. Okay. It's just a conclusion. You admit you're an alcoholic or drug addict and your life has become unmanageable. You either do or you don't. And step 2, do you believe that there might be a power greater than yourself on this planet? And if you say no to that, I can't help you. I can't help you because you don't think there's a power greater than yourself on this planet. An atomic bomb is greater than you. There's so many different powers on this earth that are greater than you. For you to think that you're the beginning and the end of everything in life is so arrogant. And so you haven't been beaten up and beaten down by drugs and alcohol enough to be teachable. And that's what that says. If that's the case, okay? And so in step 3, we say a prayer. And then we get right into action with step 4, okay? And we're going to start off with step 4 with page 64. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup, which caused our failure. Being convinced that self would manifest it in various ways was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. And this is the character defect list that I usually hand to you It was handed down from generation to generation by Clarence Snyder. So I hand you a character defect list, okay? Next, resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we have not only been mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When a spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. We asked ourselves why we were angry. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, pocketbooks, our ambitions, or personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burned up. Okay, so the resentment list is you making a list. And this is why I usually, when I give somebody a list of things to do, I say, read pages 1 through 63 in the big book, the doctor's opinion, and a spiritual experience in the back. Write out your drinking and drugging history because it's a refresher. It's going to get all of those resentments right up front in your mind, and you're not going to have to think as hard and as long to get those resentments out. Okay. So now we have a second sheet of paper. We put one on each line, just like the character defects are on each line, and we write a resentment list. We usually put God on that list, parents, siblings, cousins, people who abused us, people we abused. I mean, just there's so many different places that you can go with the resentment list. I tell people we need about a half a page to a page and a half because we're doing an exercise so that you can come to a conclusion. Okay. And if you don't put at least a half a page down there, you can't get to the exercise. If you put more than a half a page down there, you're beating the crap out of yourself and you just can't. Nobody needs to do that. Okay. That's why we don't go after every little minutia of stuff like the third grade teacher and all of that stuff way back, that we some people put on a resentment list that is like 10 or 15, 20 pages long. It's not necessary. There's between 5 and 10 resentments that have been dogging you for a long time, and we're going to put them down and we're going to get rid of them. Okay. So here's what we do. We take the first character defect that's on the list is self-centeredness. Okay. So we take our self-centeredness, and let's say mom is the first one on the list. So we're going to go back in our history. We're going to think of an instance where our self-centeredness affected our relationship with our mom. Okay. And then we put a check. Okay. And it doesn't matter if you put the check on the defect or the name, it doesn't matter. And then what happens is we just go through the whole list with self-centeredness. Then we start with the next character defect and go through the whole list. And if you don't understand a character defect, they're pretty much self-explanatory. But if you don't understand them, there's always somebody to ask. Okay. And let's see. And once we get done with that practice, we've got checks all over the page. And the whole premise behind it is you're supposed to see how your character defects have affected your relationships with other people. Most of us just go through life just with blinders on. We see what we want to see. We don't really take a look at how our conduct, how our attitude, and how the way we feel affects other people in our lives. And so all the resentments that we were sitting there and held on to bitterly for years, decades, they were all our fault. Okay. And when I did this part of the step, I broke down in tears. My sponsor put his hand on my shoulder and said, "That's enough. You're done." And I had gotten about 3/4 through the list, and I had never realized. I thought life just happened to me. I had bad luck, I had bad karma. Just life happened to me. I didn't realize that I made all the decisions that placed everything in my life. I placed all the people in my life. I placed all the jobs and all the situations and all the garbage that I put it all there. I made decisions based on self, which later placed me in a position to be hurt. Always. It was always came down to me. Sure, there's stuff that just happens, cancer and diseases and stuff. But there's stuff that most of the stuff doesn't just happen. Okay, we put it there. Okay, so if it's within us, then God has the power to cast it out. Okay, so after that, after we do resent, that's what the longest part The fourth step is the longest part of the steps. Okay. So this is page 67 is where it tells you what you're supposed to do with the two lists. Referring to our lists again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely look for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. Okay, after we're done that, we move to page 68. We think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. We asked ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. So next, and we tear these pages out of the notebook. Next, we start another list, a fear list. We take our fears and put them on paper. Very simple. Okay, and you can range from fears of like bees, bugs, and spiders and things like that. You can range from fear of rejection, fear of um, uh, uh, just about anything, fear of success, fear of failure. You can just put it all down on the paper. Okay. And let's see. Now, page 68. Now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there. But above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes, perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. 69. We reviewed our conduct over past years. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. Okay. So this is you're going to write in paragraph form on a separate piece of paper. Okay. You're going to write about your longest standing relationship or the one that is most bugging you in your mind. How's that? You're going to take and write about that relationship as it pertains to the information that they just gave us. Okay. As it pertains to were we selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? We're going to write about that in that context. And so in paragraph form, you're going to write about your worst standing relationship and take a look at it. Because what you're going to find is that we didn't have many different relationships. We had the same relationship with many different people because we were involved. That's why. Okay. So we're going to take a look at that. All right. And the last part of the fourth step, let's see, page 69. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed. Whatever our ideals turn out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we had done harm, provided we do not bring about still more harm in doing so. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. Okay, so we're going to do the ideals list next and tear out the paper and make another list. And so we have a list of 5 ideals that we give: love, purity, honesty, trust. I think maybe humility. And so we give them those 5 and encourage them to write other characteristics of what they would think they would want in a relationship. And then the 4th step is over. Okay. Then we move to page 72 and 73. Step 5, having made a personal inventory, what shall we do about it? We have been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. We have admitted certain defects We have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Now these are about to be cast out. This requires action on our part, which, when completed, will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. This brings us to the fifth step in the program of recovery mentioned in the preceding chapter. Okay. This is perhaps difficult, especially discussing our defects with another person. We think we've done well enough in admitting these things to ourselves. There is doubt about that. In actual practice, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. Many of us thought it necessary to go much further. We will be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reasons why we should do so. The best reason first: if we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. Time after time, the newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is they never completed their house cleaning. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves, but they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty. In a sense, we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. Page 75. We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Okay, and so now I have to stop and talk about the fifth step, because the fifth step is so important, and they talk about it in a couple of different spots in there. It's if you skimp on this step, if you leave something out, it's not about getting every tiny little thing. If you forgot something, don't worry about it. It's about knowingly holding something back. And what we're knowingly holding back is usually the worst thing. Okay. And I usually start off my fifth steps like this. I go, look, what is the worst thing that's been done to you, or you did to somebody else, or happened to you in your life? What's the one thing you've never told anybody else on this planet about? And usually, I mean, 98% of the people have something. They almost always have something they've never told anybody about. And these are people who've been through the steps multiple times, tried to get in it. They've been in and out of recovery for decades. And this will be the first time that they go ahead and give everything. Okay. So it's easier to work your way back from that position that you've told somebody the deep, dark secrets of your personality, your being, you just got to get rid of that stuff. You have to get rid of it, because if you don't, as an alcoholic or a drug addict, it means life or death. That's the problem. Okay. And you can talk, we just read the fifth step promises. Okay. So they're talking about the drink problem disappearing. Okay. You don't feel like you want to do crack anymore. You don't feel like you want to shoot heroin anymore. You don't feel like you want to pick up a drink or go smoke any dope anymore. Okay. These are the characteristics of a spiritual experience. A lot of people don't know they've had a spiritual experience. And I ask them, do you still have the desire to pick up a drink or a drug? And if the answer is no, then you've had the spiritual experience, because we're not able to do that on self-will. We're not able to pull that out of ourselves with self-will. We can't do it ourselves. So that means we've started to establish a relationship with God. And that's what we just read on page 75. That the fifth step promises are so strong. They're so powerful. They're so powerful because they're telling you this is the beginning of a spiritual experience. The obsession to do crack is gone. It's gone. And I look at the smiles on the people that went through the steps on September 30th, guys like Alex, and the smile never goes away. The guy his life is changing. I mean, profound changes in his personality. People are starting to serve others instead of worrying about if they have a place to sleep, if they have food. It tells us right in the beginning of these steps that once we straighten out spiritually, then we straighten out mentally and physically. Okay? We put the cart before the horse so many times. We don't need to worry about where we live, what we eat, what job we're doing. We don't need to worry about any of that outside stuff. If we stay focused on God and his world and serving others, God will provide all those things for us and better than we could have ever planned for ourselves. Always. He always does that. God is good. And after the fifth step, all right, on the bottom of 75, this is where it talks about sitting quietly for an hour, and you have to ask yourself, after you do a few hours worth of work, do you sit quietly for an hour? After you do a few days of work, do you sit quietly for an hour? After you do a few years of work, do you sit quietly for an hour? It doesn't make sense the further out you go. It only makes sense if you sit down and look, you can do this one night a week. You can do this, in a couple of different segments. It doesn't all have to be done at once, but you should be there while they're going through the fourth and fifth step, I believe. If they break down, they're going to need some support. They're going to need somebody to walk them through and let them understand what they're going through. That God is breaking them down and moving them to a place where they can have a relationship with him, that he can come live and breathe in your heart. Okay. That spiritual experience that they're talking about at the beginning after step 5, this is what happens. You say a prayer in step 3. Okay. You do the work of the 4th and 5th. In the 5th, you're ripping all this garbage out. And this God-sized hole is a vacuum. Okay. We've been spending our whole lives putting garbage in there from the world, just putting garbage in there. And when we rip that stuff out, God floods in. He takes our will from us. We don't turn our will over to him with more self-will. God takes our will from us. He's that powerful, not us. And the further along you get into these steps, the more God is in charge. God is the power. God is the one who takes over because he's the only one who has the power. Okay? So here we go. That's steps 4 and 5. That's the biggest chunk. Okay? And it says, we pocket our pride and go to it. Nope, that's not it. Returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know him better. Taking this book down off the shelf, never put it on the shelf. We turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything, for we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? Okay, so this is where somebody who just went through the 4th and 5th, they sit and they think for an hour. And I encourage them to have a piece of paper and a pen ready, so they can jot down anything that they forgot so they don't forget it again. And I'd let them sit there for at least a half hour, just to meditate, just to think on, this is your second chance. If you knowingly held something back, we get to the end of this time period, and then you ask them, is there anything that you forgot? And try to get that last nugget out of them. That being said, if you can answer to your satisfaction, then we move on. If we can answer to our satisfaction, we look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. We are now ready to let God remove all the things which we have admitted are objectionable. Can he now have them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. Page 76, next paragraph. When ready, we say something like this: my Creator, I am now willing you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go up from here to do your bidding. Amen. We have then completed step 7. And I don't know how the big book can be any clearer than that. Okay. Step 6 and 7 are 2 paragraphs in the book. And the reason they're 2 paragraphs is because we're asking God to remove the character defects. We are not working on them with more self-will. That's contrary to what the big book teaches. And a lot of people reference the 12 and 12. They go to the 12 and 12 for 6 and 7 because it elaborates on them. I'm going to say this. Okay. I got nothing against the 12 and 12. It's a handy book. It's got a lot of really good stuff in there, but it doesn't tell you how to do the steps. It gives you examples of sin and other stuff that we go through. But if you read Bill's story, Pass It On, you're going to find that Bill wrote that the step part of the 12 and 12 about at the end of a 15-year depression he was in. And he wrote it for people who had extenuating circumstances other than alcoholism. He wrote it for people that suffered from depression like he did, or anxiety, or terror, or the emotions to the extremes. If we had some of these other conditions, that was why he wrote it. It was to do after you went through the steps in the big book, to elaborate on your steps in the big book, not to replace it. The steps out of the big book were the way the people in the beginning had done them. And the reason they were so adamant about it is because of the huge success rates they had. And that's why I read all that stuff in the beginning, is to tell you where I'm coming from. Okay, my story is I did. I drank, I drugged, I did all kinds of stuff, and I got to a point where I just couldn't do it anymore. Okay, it was making my life uncomfortable. It was making my life unbearable. And I ended up in AA, and there were people there who really, just like Recovery Church, there were people there in that segment of AA. They got me active. They got me into service, thinking about other people other than myself. Okay, so we have then completed step 7, which is we asked God to remove our defects. We asked him to humbly remove them from us. Okay. So page 76. Now we need more action, without which we find faith without works is dead. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of all persons we had harmed to whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. Now we go out to our fellows and repair damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed in the beginning we would go to any length for victory over alcohol. Okay? And so we tear out the last page and we make another page. Okay? Now we're going to make an amends list. We're going to take it from our resentment list. There's people on that list that we need to make amends to. A lot of people don't know that we have resentments against them. And the book is very specific about that. We go out to these individuals and we confess our ill feeling. We apologize for for feeling that way about them, and try to set the matter right. If we owe money, we try to pay it back. Right? We don't go out and buy new clothes and new sneakers once we get a job, when we owe other people, even in a recovery community, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. We're supposed to pay that off first. That would be another example of self-centeredness. Okay. We're at this point, we're going to continuously look at self-centeredness. Okay. That's one of the things that the book tells us on page 62 is it's the major problem for us, is we're always thinking about ourselves. What are we going to get? What are we going to get? If we're going to choose a mate, what are we going to get out of it? If we're going to choose a job, what are we going to get out of it? It's always about us and our selfish and self-centered ways. This is why we need God so much. Let's see. And we talked about amends. Okay, so in the book it says, we'll read it in a minute, but the amends part of it, between that first part of it on 76, where it talks about step 8, making a list, all the way to the promises on 83, it talks about amends, all kinds of different amends. and it tells us, we're not really supposed to be going out making amends if somebody else will be harmed. Like if I go make amends to somebody and I take away from my family, that's not right either. So I have to look at each amends individually so that we can not hurt anybody anymore. That's the whole object of this. All right. Now we're at step 10. See how we went through that pretty quickly? I mean, step 4 does take a little bit of time, steps 4 and 5, but the rest of the steps, you're sent out on your way. Step 9, you're supposed to take the amends list and go make amends immediately if you can. If you can go, you can go admit your ill feeling towards somebody and repair that damage. That's what you're asked to do. It's not going to hurt anybody else. If you're single, it's not going to hurt anybody else. Okay. If somebody died, we write them a letter. I mean, it doesn't talk about that. I don't know. I don't think an amends in the book, but it does talk about writing a letter. We can write that letter and we can burn it if they have already died. Like if your mom has passed or your grandmother or your grandfather, we can write a letter, burn that and give it up to God and know that letter is going to get there. Okay. Next, page 84 and 86. This thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory, continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past. Okay? So as you do your amends, you're cleaning up the past. As you do that, you start into steps 10 and 11. Okay? We have entered the world of the spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. Okay? So when we have troubles, when we have a problem, we're looking at selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Okay? So when these crop up, it doesn't say we go to a group. It doesn't say we go to an AA meeting and dump it on somebody else. All right? It says that we go to God with it. Why? Well, because God is the only one strong enough to remove it from us. That's the problem. Okay, we're not strong enough to remove it from ourselves, and no human power is strong enough to do it either. Okay, so that's why we continuously go to God. We want to continue to watch for selfishness, self-centeredness, resentment, fear, dishonesty. These things, we always continuously go to God. You see how much we're relying on God now? We're in a 10th step. We have to rely on God all the time. We're always going to him in prayer. And one of the things that I love about Recovery Church is these people we are constantly praying. I mean, I've come up to the front and asked for prayer before. Some of the people who prayed over me have brought me to tears. I mean, such a powerful prayer direct from God. I mean, just an open pipeline to God. These are people who are continuously watching for selfishness, resentment, fear, and dishonesty. They're taking a daily inventory every day. You can't pray like that without doing that. It's in my 34 years, I know what it takes. But just like everybody else, I'm lazy. I don't want to put the effort into it. I want to just sit and watch TV. I don't want to read a book. Okay. See, it's my nature. It's in my personal nature. If I'm left with myself by myself, I'm gonna overeat. I'm gonna lust. I'm gonna be lazy and just watch TV and not do anything. That's my nature. And people all the time right now, they call me a workaholic. I'm always working, and I'm trying to combat all the selfishness and self-centeredness that is in my soul. But the best thing about this place is they're teaching me to go to God on a deeper level. And that's what we all need to do. We all need to get to God on a deeper level. I'm going to read this real quick. This is on page 14 of Bill's story. Okay. And I this is the proper place to read it. We usually read it in the beginning, but on the bottom of the page, it says, my friend had, he's talking about Ebby Thatcher. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said. And how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work or self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. Okay, and it's like I don't know. There's 4 places, I think 3 or 4 places in the text of the big book, in the steps in Bill's story. They talk about faith without works is dead from the book of James. It's a direct quote from the book of James. Faith without works is dead. They're trying to get us up off our butts and get active. Start thinking. How do you start getting rid of self-centeredness? You start by serving other people. Okay, it's imperative that we come to Recovery Church and we get a job at Recovery Church. Okay, it's imperative to the newcomer as soon as he's been through those steps, and that should be the focus in the first week or two, is to get through the steps. Once you've gotten through the steps, you're gonna stick your hand up as a sponsor, and you're gonna start taking other people through the steps. Okay, and you're gonna need to get a job in that Recovery Church so you can start serving others, and you'll look back in 6 months and you'll say, where'd all my selfishness and self-centeredness go? How come I'm not thinking about myself? I'm thinking about that sponsee that I'm going to take through the steps. Well, that's how God removes it. God removes it while we're busy doing his work. We're busy helping other people to Christ. We're busy trying to get everybody that comes in contact with us, get them hooked into God. That's all we can do. We can't save them. Only God can. And that's our job. Okay? So, right after that, it says, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted to recoil from it, as from a hot flame. Okay, so I'm going to leave the text of the 10th step, which we're supposed to read every night, and then I'm going to move on to step 11, suggest prayer and meditation. We shouldn't be shy on this matter of prayer. Better men than we are using it constantly. It works if we have the proper attitude and work at it. It would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Again, were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Do we owe an apology? Have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? Were we kind and loving toward all? What could we have done better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time? Or were we thinking of what we could do for others, of what we could pack into the stream of life? But we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. Making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. Okay. So that's the end of step. I know it says step 11, but that's the end of the nighttime reading. In the morning, we start with On Awakening. On Awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance, for after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Okay, so in thinking about our day, we may face indecision, may not be able to determine which course to take. Here we ask God for inspiration, intuitive thought, or a decision. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. We are often surprised how the right answers come after we've tried this for a while. What used to be the hunch or occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Okay, and so we're going to continue to read from On Awakening to the end of the chapter. That's step 11. We reread that at night. In the morning, and we try to start our day thinking about what God would have us be. Okay, praying to God for Him to remove the self-centeredness, the selfishness, and all of that stuff, to remove it from us and get rid of it and cast it out. Okay, so that is up to step 11. That is, in a nutshell, what we do. Okay, and I cannot say enough for page 14 of Bill's story, to perfect and enlarge your spiritual life. That's what Recovery Church was made for. Okay, it's to perfect and enlarge your spiritual life. This place has got so much that you can do, that you can study, they're going to encourage you to get into a church, a main church on a Sunday. They're going to encourage you to crack open the Bible and start reading. They're going to give away a Bible. They're going to give away a big book. They give it to you. They don't ask you to pay for it. They know in the beginning you don't have enough money to pay for it. They're going to give you resources. They got the hub down here in Delray. They've got unlimited amount of resources that the alcoholic who's new in recovery can lean on. Okay. And so page 89 is working with others. That chapter 7, is what we send them home with. We tell them to go read chapter 7 and get back to me, and we'll discuss it. But it goes about a bunch of different things. And with my history of all the people that I've talked about with taking people through the steps. I mean, one of the first guys I met when I got to AA was 415 Pete. They called him 415 Pete. They dubbed him with a nickname because he wouldn't shut up about his last drink, and it was 4:15 in the morning. He was sitting on his kitchen floor eating frozen concentrate and sucking down vodka because he was too drunk to mix the concentrate. Okay, and so they dubbed 415 Pete. 415 Pete let a drunk live in his house, and he went back out and drank. And so he kicked him out, and he came back one night, kicked in the door while Pete was sleeping. He cracked a cast iron skillet over his head, broke it in half. He died in the ambulance three times on the way to the hospital. He said there was 365 days in that year, and he didn't drink one of them. These are the guys that schooled me when I first got here. He wasn't great about taking people to the steps. A lot of people said he lost something, but these guys were continuously trying to help other people, get them to AA, get them to somebody who could give them a spiritual experience. Okay, so that we all have different talents, even in AA. We have different talents on what we're supposed to be doing, and you hear people all the time. Look at service work is service work. Just the 12th step is the 12th step. They're different. I know I know, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. First of all, you have to have a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps in order to move on. If you haven't, you have to go back and see why you didn't. Okay? We tried to carry this message. What message? The message of having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. That's the message that we're supposed to be bringing to the newcomer who doesn't know which way is up. He can't rely on his own mind. My mind was blank when I got here. I didn't have the capacity to hold a thought. I had done so much acid. My mind was burnt completely out, and I didn't have the ability to think. It was rightly so. I shouldn't have been thinking. Okay. And so when I got here, these people were in place. Okay. So, all of these people directed me to David L. And he was at AA up in Maine, and he was one of these people that would just take people through the steps, in a day, and people scoffed at it. People scoffed at it. As soon as you went through, all the old timers with long-term sobriety would come in, and they would just crap all over you because they knew you weren't around sober long enough to take care of yourself. They'd never go to David, and after a time, they'd never come back to me. I tell people, give them my number. I'd love to talk to them, because it's not. These people are speaking from a place of ignorance. They don't know what the early timers, the first 100 people were doing to get to this spiritual experience. That's all they talked about, was the spiritual experience. It talks about it over and over in the book, and we just ignore it in AA. And that's why Recovery Church formed, is because the spiritual experience is it's everything the steps are about, is to get you to a spiritual experience, a connection with God that's going to remove the obsession to drink and do drugs. That's the whole premise behind the steps. So if you've got a disease which is mental and physical, okay, and you put it down, you don't have to deal with the physical anymore. You're left with the mental. That's why we keep going back out. It's the mental obsession. And if that is removed, then we're not struggling with alcoholism, drug addiction. The people in the book talk about it being removed. If you go through these steps and you start sponsoring other people and you start taking them through the steps, you're not even going to want to you're not even going to want to think about drinking. You don't even think about doing crack or heroin. You just keep moving it forward and you begin to build a life of service. And you haven't lived until you've watched the light come on into somebody else's eyes. It talks about that, and I'll read this paragraph out of Working with Others. Practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intense work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill. And here's the promises of the 12th step. Life will take on new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. And I'm going to leave you with that. And when you're sponsoring other people, you could even get a group going of just your sponsees and have a once a week meeting with those people who are like-minded with you, on the same page of the steps, on the same page with God. And you can just get more and more involved. Start studying the Bible, start getting to know our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, because he can help when nobody else can. Life is going to come at you here and there. This is the stuff that saves you from having to pick up a drinking drug. So if you're interested in going through the steps like this, if you're interested in starting to pick this up, and it's a really nice, neat package to take somebody else to the steps with, because it can be done in a day. It can be done in a couple of meetings. It can be done in a couple of half a days, one day a week for a month. You can meet for a couple of hours, and you can elaborate a little bit more on it. We're going to be having here in Delray, RC, we're going to have some step days. We had one September 30th. We call them step days. We're going to get together in an auditorium. We'll have people there to receive your fifth step, but if you want to bring somebody to receive your fifth step, you can do that too. Or they want to show up at a certain time to receive a fifth step, that's fine too. We want you to be as comfortable as possible. And then we can instruct you when we have one of these days. Probably, I think we're looking at late February, March, maybe have a day like this once every couple of months or a quarter. And if you're new, it's a great way to get through the steps really quick so you can have the spiritual experience. If you're going to see this online, we're going to have handouts. We're going to have attachments, which going to tell you in full what I read out of the big book. It's going to give you a narrative that one of my sponsees probably 2 decades ago typed up. And she just explains how we go through. A couple of things I didn't mention, I have a readings that I do that were handed down to me from Clarence Snyder. It's 34 years old. It's got coffee stains on it. Everything I have that's old has got coffee stains and crayon marks on it from the kids and being in AA. And that stuff will be available with the package that they put online. The character defect list. And if you have any questions, you could see Pastor Mitch, or you can call me. He'll have my number. And I would be more than happy to help you get through this. If you need me to come somewhere, we can try to line something up with that too. And put a presentation on so that you can see this thing in action, and you can watch the people's eyes just light up. Newcomers, the newer they are, the more they respond to this. It's just incredible to watch that light come on in somebody's eye. I talked to Pastor Mitch about this probably 6-9 months ago with my buddy Garrett. Garrett's a guy I took to the steps 20 years ago, and he's the one that led me to Recovery Church. He asked me 4 times to come here is what it took for me to get to Recovery Church. Never stop asking people to come here. Never. I'm one of the examples of what it takes to get somebody to Recovery Church. And you know what? This is going to be a great ministry, getting people through the steps so they can get connected to Jesus Christ, because that is the end result. That is what we're looking for, is so that we can encourage others. We can encourage them to believe in God, believe in our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And when the time gets tough, as it says in Bill's story on page 14, the certain trials and low spots come. We're going to have solid rock foundation to stand on. We're going to be able to stand on that foundation and and not waver in any storm that comes our way. The handouts, I'm sure they'll be on the website too. If you need anything else, like I said, Pastor Mitch will have my number. If you need me to come somewheres, I'm more than willing to. If they don't all ask at once. And as far as Step Day here down in Delray, we're in the process of acquiring a space on a regular basis. So I look forward to seeing and meeting you people as we walk this journey through Recovery Church and incorporating the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous out of the big book into this fellowship, and watch it just take off. Thank you.